Hello. Tonight I'd like to talk a little bit about food sources for aquariums, particularly saltwater aquariums, and just some things I've seen come up recently as I browse various different forums and groups when people are looking to get into the hobby, and just kind of some ideas of what's good to go with, what's not good to go with, and that sort of thing. Now, obviously, if you've seen, other videos on my channel, you know that I am a huge proponent of LRS Reef Frenzy when it comes to saltwater fish. The reason being because basically it gives you everything in one clean food source. You've got like 15 different things that are in it, and it has greens, it's got meat, it's got, vitamins and various other different things that are in it. So it's just a great all-around food source for your tank. But we can also cover some of the various other options because, I recognize in some cases for some people, LRS Reef Frenzy or frozen foods in particular aren't necessarily the most practical due to, various different reasons. So the one that comes up most common, though, that I would say is just all around not the best choice of food for fish would be brine shrimp. Now, the reason that I bring up brine shrimp is that it has its use, don't get me wrong. If you're having a fish that's being really picky, you're trying to get it to feed or whatever, and you've tried, LRS Reef Frenzy, you've tried mysis shrimp, you've tried, the arctopods, you've tried, just all these various different things that you can think of in order to get the fish to eat, and it still won't. Brine shrimp a lot of times can help induce feeding. So in that case, I would say yes, brine shrimp is useful. But as a regular diet staple, it is a very poor nutrition source. I think one of the best descriptions I've heard of it, and I'm trying to remember who it was who posted it on a forum, made the comment that basically brine shrimp is the equivalent of giving your kids candy all the time. If you're talking about giving it as a regular food source for your fish. It's very nutrient poor, and so yeah, the fish like it, they like the taste of it and everything else, but they're not getting a lot of nutrients and nutritional value out of it. So like I said, the candy bar analogy was great. So anyways, if you're looking at brine shrimp, you need to be looking at it as maybe like in a supplemental or occasional type feeding type food, or inducing feeding in a picky fish or something like that. That's probably the best use for brine shrimp. The cornerstone of any good saltwater fish diet should be mysis shrimp. It's very nutrient dense. It's got, in terms of a meaty diet, obviously if you have an herbivore, then you want to have something like, seaweed, nori, whatever you want to call it, as a cornerstone of their diet. And omnivores, obviously you want to get a mix, which is one of the reasons why, once again, LRS Reef Frenzy is such a great food source. One of the things you have to look at as well, whether they be flake, pellet, and even frozen foods, a lot of these manufacturers will use cheap fillers, which when you put them in your tank, you will notice that the water turns a little bit browner quicker, especially if you have a smaller tank and you're not running a protein skimmer. This is a huge factor. So that was one of the reasons why I switched to LRS Reef Frenzy, was because there was a noticeable difference in the clarity of my water when I started, comparing different food sources, arctopods, brine shrimp. I've tried frozen mysis, PE mysis, PE mysis pellets. I've tried spirulina formula, mix of greens and brine shrimp. And I noticed that in every case, the water was visibly dirtier with the other food sources. If you're looking for a dry food that would be a good alternative, as it were, to LRS Reef Frenzy, New Life Spectrum does make a decent line of dry pellet foods. So if for whatever reason you can't go with frozen LRS Refrenzy, you can try going with the New Life Spectrum pellets. And as I understand it, LRS also actually does have a dry line, but I don't hear of too many people using them. So anyways, these are just some of the options and things that you're looking at when you're looking at fish. And, you know, and the other thing is you really have to do your research into your fish. I can't tell you how many times I see people who are trying to give herbivore fish, you know, like tangs, fox faces, you know, or even omnivores like clownfish, dwarf angels, and they're just trying to give them strict meaty diets and then wondering why they're not doing so well. And it's like, well, you know, hey, come on. You know, you can't give a fish that's either a vegetarian or a fish that eats both, you know, meat and greens, a diet of just strictly dirty meat, as it were, you know, with some of these brine or mysis type diets with cheap fillers, and expect them to do well long term. So it's really good for, you know, for you to make sure that you do your research and you know what kind of a diet that they have in the wild. You know, you want to make sure that the herbivore fish have a steady diet of greens, you know, like in my case, you know, my former yellow tang and now currently my one spot fox face, I make sure that he's got, you know, some seaweed every single day, you know, seaweed or nori, and you know, just to make sure he's getting the greens in there. And then, of course, the LRS Refrenzy does have some seaweed and greens in the diet as well that it will eat. Now, the interesting thing is, realistically, with rare exceptions, most fish, truthfully, are omnivores. Now, granted, the degree with which they will eat greens or meat depends on what they eat in nature and in the wild. But, you know, I've seen, when I had my yellow tang, probably one of the most shocking things that I ever saw was when my wrasse tore into a turbo snail that had, you know, recently been killed or was dying. The yellow tang got right in there and just chowed down on the turbo snail. It never actually killed one on its own, but it had no problem scavenging the meat from a turbo snail. So even though technically he's supposed to be strictly an herbivore. So anyways, the point is that herbivores need the amino acids from meat and certain other nutrients from it, at least as a supplemental diet in there, which is why I would say that it's best to kind of go for an omnivore-based diet with any given fish. The only true, you know, dyed-in-the-wool carnivore I can say that I've seen for sure is my pajama cardinal fish. He will not touch anything green. He will, you know, even with the LRS Refrenzy, if it's got something green in it, he'll spit it out and then go for the meaty chunks. So he's the only one I've seen that is truly living up to being 100% a carnivore. Even my wrasses have adapted to seaweed. My fox face is adapted to meat. And of course, my coral beauty dwarf angel, being an omnivore, he eats everything. Thankfully, not my corals, though. So, anyways, there's just a lot of different options there. And the bottom line is you really want to make sure you're giving, in whether you're doing it manually or whether you're getting kind of an all-in-one diet like LRS Refrenzy, you want to make sure you are giving your fish a varied diet. It's the best way to ensure that they're healthy, getting all the different nutrients that they need in order to be healthy. And that's just kind of what I've got as far as, you know, discussing various different food sources, what's good, kind of what to avoid. And that's all I've got, and thanks for watching.